Good morning, geometry gurus. I hope you are all doing well. Sorry that I'm not there live with you today, but hopefully this will be short, painless, and very informative, just like everything else we do together. Today we're going to talk about equations of perpendicular bisectors. Before I get into the notes that you have in front of you, I want to review some things that you do not have in front of you. Um, so, quick review of the difference between parallel lines versus perpendicular lines. So parallel, I'm sure you remember, are two lines that never intersect. Technically, in geometry, they have to be on the same coordinate plane. That means if they're on a different flat surface, they can't be parallel or perpendicular because they're not on the same graph. So for example, the line that you draw on your paper and the line that the person next to you draw on their paper might have the same slope, but in theory, because they're on separate sheets of paper, they're in different planes. So they're not parallel because they're not in the same plane. All right, it's a little existentialist, but that's the idea. Anyways, two lines that have equal slopes are parallel. So both of the lines that I drew have a slope of 1. So one of the equations would be y equals x plus 8, and the other one would be y equals x minus 3, both having a slope of positive 1. So when you have a slope of positive 1, you might not see the slope drawn in. Like the number 1, you won't see it drawn. Now, perpendicular would have a slope that is opposite reciprocal. We've talked about this off and on last week, formalized it on our lesson on Thursday, depending on when you're watching this video. But opposite reciprocal slope means the opposite part is taking the positive or negative value of the original slope and switching it to the opposite sign. So if my original slope is positive, then my opposite is negative. The reciprocal piece takes our fraction a over b and flips it to b over a. So that's what opposite reciprocal slopes looks like. So we did some work on it on Thursday. If your original slope was a positive 1, the opposite reciprocal is negative 1. The reason why that works is because 1 over 1, flip it to negative 1 over 1 is still just positive 1 and negative 1. So my perpendicular line would have a negative slope and a slope of negative 1. And that would be perpendicular to both of our parallel lines. We are going to take the idea of opposite reciprocal slopes, and then we are going to combine it with the other thing I want to review with you, and that is midpoint. So we did midpoint on the first day of the lesson, of the unit. Midpoint is when you add the two x values together and you add the two y values together and then divide them by 2. It's basically the average of the two x's and the average of the two y's. So if I have the point negative 6, 3 and the point 8, 5, I would take negative 6 plus 8 divided by 2. And then separately, the y values get added and divided by 2. Do the work with each numerator separately. Negative 6 plus 8 is negative 2. 3 plus 5 is 8 divided by 2. And then divide it for your final answer. If it doesn't divide evenly, you can leave it as a decimal or as the fraction. It doesn't matter because it's the same value either way. We are going to combine these two concepts, perpendicular lines and midpoint, in order to find the equations of perpendicular bisectors. And please remember, this perpendicular piece is separate from the bisector piece, so we will have to find each of those pieces of information separately. All right, so to do this, we're going to write the equation of the line that's perpendicular bisector of the line segment having endpoints at negative 6, 1 and 2, 5. Keep in mind, you cannot cut a line in half because it has no ends, so it has no middle. So we can take a line that's a perpendicular bisector, and we can cut the segment in half. So let's plot the point -6, 1. I actually think the points on your paper are different. I think the points on your paper are 3, -1, and 3, 5. That's what I had on my notes. So let's do those points instead. All right, 3, -1, and 3, 5. That's our segment. We're going to draw the line perpendicular to that one and passing through the midpoint. Now you may be able to do this on your graph without a lot of extra work, but I'm going to show you all the steps so when you get into a different situation, maybe a situation where you wouldn't have a graph, or maybe a situation that is not vertical or horizontal. That way you'll have the proper accurate steps, an example of how to do each step. So first things first. Step 1, we're going to find our midpoint. And the midpoint is like what we just practiced, or what I just practiced for you on the last page. We're going to add the two x values together, divide by 2, and we are going to add the two y values together and divide by 2. Now keep in mind, guys, you're watching a video, so if I'm going too fast, just hit pause, write down what you need to write down, and then hit play again, and you can continue. -1 plus 5 would be 4. So our midpoint will be 3, 2. And we can plot that dot. There's our midpoint. Next thing we need to do is get our slope. So it's obvious that our slope of the original equation, because it's a vertical line, that part's the obvious part. It's a vertical line. You may not remember, but vertical lines have slopes that are undefined or no slope. I'm going to show you why practicing our slope formula. y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. When you do your y2 minus y1, we end up with 5 minus a -1. 5 minus a -1 actually turns into 5 plus 1. Subtracting the negative turns into plus. Now in our numerator, that just adds up to 6, but our denominator ends up to 0. And if you type that in to the calculator will give you an answer that says undef, which is calculator shorthand for undefined, which you may also see or hear called no slope. So the slope of a vertical line is undefined, or sometimes stated as no slope. So what's our perpendicular slope to a slope that's undefined? Well, perpendicular to a vertical line would be a horizontal line passing through the midpoint, but what's the slope of that? A slope of a horizontal line is 0. So our perpendicular slope that we are looking for, perpendicular to undefined, would be a slope of 0. We did a little bit of practice of writing the equations of vertical, horizontal lines. So our vertical line would have the equation of x equals 3 because it crosses the x-axis at the number 3. So vertical is x equals, horizontal is y equals. And it would be y equals 2 because that explains where it's located. So that is the equation of our perpendicular bisector. Y equals 2. So that one was a little bit easier than some of the other ones that you'll have to do because we didn't need point slope form. We didn't need y equals mx plus b. So let's do an example that's not vertical and horizontal and not on a graph. We're not going to use the graph for this one. All right, given the segment KL with point L at 812 and K at 24, write the equation of the line that is the perpendicular bisector to segment KL. So first thing we want to do is get our midpoint. So I'm going to slow down. I'm going to let you find the midpoint first. Then I'll do it and we'll see if our numbers match. I think you might have numbers different from mine. All right, so hopefully we have the same midpoint. Now I want you to do the slope, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Make sure you are subtracting the -2 for the x values. And you should reduce your slope fraction as much as possible. If you don't want to do that with your own brain, then use the calculator. That's why you have access to those. And the inspires, if you just type in -8 divided by 10, will automatically reduce the fraction for you and give it right back to you in fraction form so that you know your slope. Now this is the slope of the given two lines. What we need to do is translate that into our opposite reciprocal slope. So the negative turns to positive, and then the reciprocal piece flips our fraction. So instead of 4 over 5, it turns to 5 over 4. Now we're at the point where we can write our equation. So to write our equation, we are going to use point slope form this time because we do not have a vertical line or a horizontal line, and we don't have the y-intercept. And we also don't need the y-intercept, to be honest with you. So our point slope form is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And when we were practicing this, when we first learned it, we were just practicing putting the numbers into the correct spots, knowing that the y stayed the y, the m gets replaced with the number, and then the y1 and the x1 get replaced with a number. So we replace the y1, the m, and the x1 with numbers that come from our midpoint and our perpendicular slope. So our midpoint was the point 3, 3, so y minus 3, x minus 3, and our perpendicular slope goes where the m was, that's positive 5 over 4, and that is the equation of our perpendicular bisector. So you find the midpoint, you find the slope, you translate the slope of the given 2 points into the opposite reciprocal to get the perpendicular slope, then you write the equation. That's how you find the equation of the perpendicular bisector. So now if you would please be so kind to your substitute or whoever's there babysitting you while I'm not there, turn the page and practice on homework day 6. If you finish before the end of class, then please get that weekly done and I can check it when I come back tomorrow. Have a wonderful day. I miss you guys. Be nice, do well, and I'll see you tomorrow.